15 terrifying moments will be in this video, and the story of the eerie footprints will surely haunt you. Welcome to a journey filled with haunting and terrifying moments, where every step could be your last. In this video, we will explore 15 of the most horrifying collisions, strange situations, and eerie occurrences that even science can't explain. You will feel the suffocating tension in every moment as you witness terrifying supernatural phenomena and ghosts passing through the midst of ordinary life. But that's just the beginning. The second part will take you into a chilling story, a tale of eerie footprints leading a man into a mysterious house where restless spirits cannot find peace. As he enters this world, you will see the price he must pay for venturing into a nightmare with no escape. Prepare yourself, turn off the lights, and put on your headphones, because what you're about to witness will keep your eyes glued to the screen. Do you have the courage to walk through those eerie footprints? The story you're about to hear is a journey with no turning back, a meeting with the mysterious wandering souls and eerie footprints. The footprints in the road is not just an ordinary ghost story. It is a warning about what can happen when you step in places that humans should never tread. The story begins with Michael, an ordinary man, but on a foggy night, he unknowingly steps onto a path with no way out. Wet footprints appear on the road, leading him to an old house where time seems to have stopped, and restless spirits cannot find peace. He cannot stop walking despite the fear rising within him. And then, those footprints, those ghostly figures, pull him into a labyrinth of darkness and death. From the cold whispers and vengeful spirits to the horrifying discovery of the price he must pay, everything will send chills down your spine. Michael not only faces wandering souls, but also confronts the harsh truth that sometimes the footprints you follow could be the footprints of your own demise. The only advice is, do not follow those footprints. But can Michael escape the temptation of these mysteries? Night falls on the deserted highway of the American West. The cold, damp air of autumn lingers in the stillness, broken only by the hum of the car engine and the rustling of wind through distant trees. From the window of his old car, Michael Thompson gazes out, his eyes tired after a long day of driving from Los Angeles, back to a place so far away that no one remembers it anymore. He drives through a stretch of road with no streetlights, surrounded only by endless fields and distant, foggy hills. The car speeds along, the night seemingly swallowing everything in its path. Suddenly, a faint light flickers in the rearview mirror. Must be another car, Michael tells himself, but the light doesn't disappear as quickly as a passing vehicle would. It's strange, blinking persistently, as if it's calling to him. Michael looks back again, his eyes narrowing. Then he sees them. Footprints imprinted on the empty road. Strange footprints, not human. Each footprint leaves a trail of droplets that's as if someone is walking through a puddle. But the sky is dry, and there's no rain. Michael's lips go dry. His heart begins to race. He pulls the car over to the side of the road, his gaze fixed on the tracks. Impossible, he murmurs. Who would be walking out here in this cold at this hour? But then, the footprints, they don't stop. They continue, leading him down a more remote path where the headlights can't reach. Michael can't resist his curiosity. He opens the car door, stepping outside, a cold shiver washing over him. The footprints continue as if inviting him to follow. Michael stood motionless, the cold wind blowing through his hair, sending a shiver down his spine. The dripping footprints were still imprinted on the road, leading into the darkness ahead. He glanced at the car, then back at the footprints, feeling a sense of unease. It can't be. Who would walk out here at this time? Michael whispered to himself, yet a part of him urged him to follow, to discover what was happening. He took a step forward, moving slowly, his feet sinking into the thin evening fog. Suddenly a faint sound echoed, like fabric brushing against dry grass. Michael quickly turned, but there was only the faint light from the headlights, no one in sight. He looked down again, following the strange footprints. A few minutes later, he stopped as he realized the footprints led him into a small forest. In the darkness, the tall trees loomed like shadowy ghosts. Michael looked around. The air felt thicker, his heart pounding. I must be crazy. Michael muttered to himself, but his feet kept moving, following the footprints, unable to stop. Then a voice, soft as the wind, whispered into his ear, making him jump. "Where are you going?" Michael turned, but there was no one there. Only the silence, the trees, and the fog enveloping him. The feeling of fear began to creep in, but he continued walking. The footprints led him to an old house, its moss-covered roof and dark windows like bottomless pits. "No, I can't go in there," Michael told himself. But an odd force, like an invisible hand, pulled him closer. He stepped onto the old wooden porch, the steps creaking underfoot. When he pushed the door, it opened easily, as if it had been waiting for him. Michael took a deep breath and stepped inside. Inside was a dark, musty space, the smell of dampness thick in the air. Old wooden chairs, a dusty cabinet filled with grime. Michael turned on his phone's flashlight into the weak light flickering across the rotting walls. A strange feeling made him stop. Something was wrong in this house. "Is anyone here?" Michael called out, but there was no answer. Only the sound of soft footsteps echoing from the end of the hall. He swallowed hard, trying to control the rising fear inside him. Though he saw no one, the sensation of being watched was unmistakable. He walked down the hall, and suddenly the flashlight flickered out. A pitch-black darkness enveloped everything. "Oh my God!" Michael gasped, his hands trembling as he tried to turn the phone back on. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew through the window, knocking a wooden chair over. Michael spun around, seeing a figure pass by the door. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice full of panic. No one answered, but a soft sigh echoed from behind him, and an old hoarse voice, cracked like broken glass, whispered, "You shouldn't be here." Michael turned, but there was only empty silence. Cold chills pierced through his skin. The footprints continued to mark the floor, leading him deeper into the house where strange shadows waited. "I need to get out of here," Michael nearly shouted, but his feet wouldn't move. The footprints had led him into a maze, and now he couldn't escape. Michael could no longer bear the chilling sensation running down his spine. He turned around, but saw nothing but deep darkness. The footprints were no longer just simple damp marks. They were pulling him into a shadowy area where the air felt thick and suffocating. He clenched his teeth, trying to remain calm, but his phone's flashlight began flickering before it finally died. The room around him suddenly sank into a profound, inky blackness. Everything seemed to be suffocating under an invisible force, heavy as if something supernatural was pressing down on him. A faint screeching sound came from behind. Michael spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. A figure, blurry and fading in the dim light from his flashlight, stood motionless near the door. She didn't move, just stood there, eyes wide open, staring at him. Her skin was pale, and her long, bony fingers reached out, as though they were trying to touch him. Michael wanted to scream, but his throat tightened, rendering him mute. "You can't leave," the voice rasped, as if coming from the depths of someone who had been dead for a long time. Michael couldn't comprehend it. His legs were frozen, though his body screamed for him to run. The space around him seemed buried in a nightmare. The surroundings became distorted and warped, as though he had stepped into a macabre painting. Footprints suddenly appeared everywhere. On the walls, on the ceiling, twisting as if they were moving, wrapping around him. "No! No! Don't come near me!" Michael screamed, his hands trembling, but his cries had no effect. The footprints seemed alive, as if they were the souls of the trapped, dragging him deeper into a cold, desolate place. "You cannot leave," the raspy voice echoed again, this time from all directions. "You have come here, and you will stay here forever." Suddenly, the room began to spin. Everything around Michael started to change. The walls cracked, the chairs shattered. A ghostly figure swept past him, breathing heavily, each exhale like a gust of cold wind against his face. The ghost's eyes were hollow, empty, and within them burned a fury that could not be described. Michael began to see haunting images in his mind, blurry faces, eerie laughter echoing from all directions. The restless souls surrounded him, their eyes cold, radiating an unspoken hatred. One of them approached, its skeletal hand reaching out, as though to pull him into a deep, dark pit. "Please, no," Michael screamed, trying to run, but his legs wouldn't obey. He felt the cold, clammy hand of the ghost on his back, like a wound that could never heal. Suddenly, the footprints reappeared, but this time they weren't just wet prints, they were blood stains. Fresh blood flowed from the ghost's fingertips, staining the entire room in red. "You've arrived. You can't leave now." The light from Michael's phone flickered back on, but this time it was no gentle glow. It blazed with a blinding intensity, like a light from the other side. In that moment, Michael saw himself, lying on the cold ground, eyes wide open, motionless. The bloody footprints surrounding his body continued to print on the floor as if this journey would never end. The light from Michael's phone flickered on again, but this time it was not just the faint glow of a flashlight. It was strong, flashing like a lightning bolt in the night, illuminating every corner of the room. Behind the light, Michael saw himself, standing in the middle of the room. A reflection of himself, but not the real him. It was a shadowy version, like a ghost mocking him with a twisted smile. "You can't escape," the voice of that version echoed, but not from the ghost's mouth. Rather, it came from Michael himself. A coldness invaded his heart as he saw himself standing there with an indescribable, eerie smile, eyes as black as a bottomless pit. What is happening?" Michael gasped, unable to understand. The room seemed to spin around him, the walls swaying as if the space around him was no longer real. A soft, eerie laugh filled the darkness around the room. Michael turned, seeing dark shapes begin to emerge from the shadows, the forms of long-dead souls, restless spirits unable to find peace. They reached out, their eyes glowing with hatred and suffering. "Why me?" Michael muttered, stepping back, one step at a time. "I didn't do anything wrong." The ghost before him stood with hollow eyes, void of emotion, only hatred and darkness filling them. Its cold fingers brushed his face, making his skin crawl in pain, as though it were being torn apart. "You've come, and you'll never leave." The spirit's voice became a resounding echo, as if the entire room was asking the same question. "Why did you come here?" "Don't!" Michael screamed, losing all composure. He tried to turn and run, but his legs felt frozen. Each step became heavier, as if the entire world was holding him down. The footprints in the room no longer just marked the floor, they extended like invisible threads, pulling him closer to the darkness. The ghost's hand, no longer just reaching out, now fully touched him. Michael felt a coldness seep through his entire body, as though his life force was being drained bit by bit. "No, no!" Michael screamed, but nothing changed. He turned and saw his own face still standing there, grinning. All that remained was silence. A terrifying silence enveloped the room, as if time itself had stopped. "You are ours," the voice boomed, this time not from the ghost, but from Michael, his own reflection in the room. "And no one will save you." Suddenly, the footprints reappeared. They slid past his body, painting blood trails from the wounds on his flesh. The footprints now filled the space as though they were alive, moving, and never stopping. Michael felt each of them imprinting into his mind, an inescapable haunting. The cold seeped into his skin, but not the usual chill. This was the cold of death, the cold of souls trapped forever. He began to see blurry images, dense darkness, the angry eyes of those long dead. They stood around him, silent, just staring with hungry eyes. "You will never leave." Then a sound erupted, the sound of cracks splintering, as if the room was being torn apart, as if the entire space was collapsing, dragging Michael into a bottomless abyss. The only light left was from the blood-stained footprints, like a path leading him into endless darkness. The overwhelming sense of despair and fear made it impossible for Michael to breathe, as if all the air had been sucked from his lungs. He saw the bloodstains continuing to guide him into a pitch-black void with no end. The dead souls, the ghosts in the room, were drawing closer, silent, but their presence like an inescapable curse. And as everything faded into darkness, when the last bit of light flickered out, Michael could no longer recognize himself. He no longer knew who he was or where he was. All that remained were the footprints, repeating over and over in the dark, pulling him down into a pit from which there was no escape. In the all-encompassing darkness, when every sound around seemed to have ceased, Michael felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. He dared not turn around, not daring to see any more. Each step of the souls around him echoed steadily like calls from hell itself. His mind seemed to tear apart, scattering into fragments, no longer able to think clearly. It was at this moment, when he thought he had completely succumbed, that a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Perhaps he was wrong. Maybe the footprints were not an end, but a path leading out. An escape he had failed to recognize. I'm not the only one, Michael suddenly remembered. Earlier, when the footprints appeared on the empty road, they never stopped. They only continued, as if urging him to follow. He was not the first, and perhaps he would not be the last. Those souls, those ghosts lingering in the house, all had a reason to exist. And perhaps they were just stuck in some horrific game, just like him. I'm not the only one, Michael whispered, as if trying to convince himself. He looked around, noticing the darkness beginning to pull apart, slowly expanding. But it wasn't because he had escaped, it was because the darkness was consuming him. In that moment, a loud noise rang out, as though the room was collapsing. Everything, every soul, every shadow, rushed toward him at an unimaginable speed. "Don't!" Michael screamed, but there was no reply. Then a sound came from outside the house. A strange sound, like a car door opening. A familiar feeling surged within him. Michael lifted his head, his heart pounding, a glimmer of hope igniting in his chest. The ghosts were drawing nearer, but something unusual had appeared outside the window. A car, its headlights shining brightly in the darkness. "Is anyone there?" Michael yelled, rushing toward the door. The door opened easily, but not to anyone else. It was his own shadowy version standing there. This time, it wasn't the ghost mocking him, but himself, standing there with cold eyes and an emotionless face. Michael felt everything starting to spin. All his fear, all his despair merged into this dark figure. "Where will you go?" his version asked, the voice echoing in the vast space. Michael wanted to speak, but couldn't. He only saw the car outside, its headlights still shining, waiting. But the car wasn't anyone else's, it was his. Michael realized that he had never left that road, he had never escaped from himself. The room around him began to shatter, not because of the ghosts, not because of some unseen force, but because of the truth. It was all an illusion, a trap he had set for himself. Those footprints were not the marks of the dead souls, but the traces of his own decisions, the mistakes he had made. "No, it can't be!" Michael screamed, but he fell silent as he saw the car outside begin to reverse, fading away. At the same time, everything disappeared. The room, the ghosts, the footprints, everything vanished like smoke. Michael stood still, looking at the space around him. It was morning. He was still standing on the highway, the first light of dawn breaking from the distance. The footprints were gone, and everything around him was quiet, as if nothing had happened. But when he looked down, there was still one footprint left on the road, an unfamiliar footprint, not his, but from someone else, someone who was still watching him from afar. Thank you for following the story, the footprints on the road from start to finish. We hope that the dramatic twists and eerie moments have provided you with an unforgettable experience. Every story has its own unique power to captivate and evoke fear, and we're glad you joined us on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss any other ghost stories. Be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback is the greatest motivation for us to keep creating and bringing you even more exciting content. Thank you for your support, and always remember, sometimes the footprints on the road are the traces of souls that never leave. See you in the next stories.